Now, before you start judging anybody, and I know you will because people love to arrive at a story with a verdict already in their pocket, let me slow this down for you. Because this is not the kind of story that starts with lipstick on a collar or a suspicious hotel receipt or me finding some shirt in my laundry that smelled like cologne and bad decisions. No. This story starts on a Wednesday. A perfectly ordinary, aggressively forgettable Wednesday. And it ends with me sitting across from a federal agent in a coffee shop, shaking hands with the man who had apparently been playing my role in my wife's life for nearly 2 years. Metaphorically, I hope. Although by the end of that week I was no longer making strong distinctions between metaphor and insult. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember this, because it matters. The people in these stories almost always had every chance to act like decent human beings. They just chose otherwise. Drop a comment. You're going to love it here. My name is Elliot Mercer. I am 41 years old. I drive a silver Toyota Tacoma with a dent over the right rear wheel. Well, that I have been meaning to fix since February, and now probably never will because some things stop feeling urgent once your wife gets arrested for federal financial crimes. Before that Wednesday, I was, as far as I knew, a happily married man. My wife, Camille Mercer, was the founder and CEO of Mercer Hale Partners, a mid-sized private investment firm in downtown Seattle. She built it from a folding table, a borrowed conference room, and the kind of terrifying focus that makes other ambitious people quietly reevaluate whether they actually want success badly enough to deserve it. I used to watch her in a boardroom and think, God help whoever underestimates that woman. Turns out God was busy, and I had badly misunderstood who needed the warning. I loved her. Deeply, thoroughly, embarrassingly. The way a man loves a woman whose shoe size he knows, whose coffee order he can recite from memory, whose face he can read from across a room, or thought he could. I knew how she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was about to say something difficult. I knew that she hated cucumber water on principle. I knew she liked yellow tulips but hated being given flowers at work because she said it made powerful women look decorative. I knew that when she said she was just thinking, what she meant was she was mentally rebuilding an entire wall of the house for no reason anyone else could understand. I knew this woman, or at least I had spent 6 years loving the version of her that had been made available to me. On that Wednesday, I decided to surprise her with lunch. Nothing elaborate. Just Korean takeout from the place on Pine she loved. Spicy noodles, extra pickled radish, and dumplings she always stole from my container while pretending she didn't want them. It was one of those dumb, small husband gestures that makes up most of what marriage actually is when you strip away the speeches and photographs. I walked into the lobby of Mercer Hale Partners at 12:18 in the afternoon, carrying a paper bag that smelled like sesame oil and soy and optimism. The lobby was exactly the kind of place that makes you unconsciously check your posture. White marble, soft lighting, frosted glass, a reception desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who considered warmth a legal risk. There was instrumental jazz floating through the air, the sort that sounds expensive and unrequested at the same time. And behind the security desk was a guard named Marcus. Big man, clean beard, square jaw. The kind of posture ex-military men never entirely lose even when they've spent 5 years in a blazer and an earpiece. He held up one hand when I approached. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yeah," I said, smiling, holding up the bag. "I'm here to see Camille Mercer." "I'm her husband." There was a pause. Not the ordinary kind. Not the kind where someone checks a calendar or reaches for the phone. This was a pause with architecture. Layers, weight, the kind of pause that tells you something is very wrong before anyone bothers to hand you the words. Marcus looked at me. Then, and I will never forget this as long as I live, he laughed. Not loudly. He had too much training for that. But enough. Enough that his shoulders moved and his eyes crinkled and he had to press his lips together like a man physically restraining the rest of the joke. Then he said, "Sir, I see Mrs. Mercer's husband every single day. I just stared at him. He nodded toward the elevator bank behind me. As a matter of fact, he said, there he is now. I turned around. And I want you to understand something clearly. In that 1 second, my brain fired every plausible explanation it had in inventory. Mistaken identity, bad joke, twin, security training exercise. Some executive I'd met once and forgotten. None of them lasted. Because the man walking out of the elevator was not me. He was taller than I am. Better suit. Dark hair at the temples going silver in a way that looked intentional instead of genetic. He moved like the kind of man who signs things people obey. Leather portfolio under one arm, Bluetooth in one ear, face calm in the way only very rich or very dangerous men can manage. He looked like the sort of husband a woman like Camille Mercer would be expected to have in public. Meanwhile, I was standing there in work boots and a jacket with takeout in my hand and a small grease mark on the cuff from checking the truck oil that morning. He saw me, ended his call, and something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, recognition without familiarity, assessment. He walked toward me, slower now. And because apparently my survival instincts have always been less fight or flight and more golden retriever at a fireworks display, I smiled and stuck out my hand. Hey, I said. Good to finally put a face to the name. He looked at my hand, then my face. Then he took it. One firm shake. And very quietly, close enough that Marcus couldn't hear, he said 4 words that rearranged my entire life. We need to talk. Now. A smart man might have walked. A wise man would have gotten back in the Tacoma, driven somewhere private, and had a compact, dignified psychological collapse. I followed him across the street to a coffee shop. I know. But there are moments where reality cracks open just enough for you to glimpse something moving behind it, and whatever better judgment you possess gets elbowed aside by the oldest instinct in the world. I need to know. That instinct will ruin you. It will also save you. His name, he told me after we sat down in a back booth, was Special Agent Nathan Vale, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. He slid his badge across the table with one hand and wrapped the other around a black coffee like he had done this exact thing before, which I suppose he had. I looked at the badge for longer than dignity usually permits. You're FBI, I said. Yes. And you've been pretending to be my wife's husband. For 21 months, he said. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes the body runs out of legitimate responses and just throws a noise into the room to keep itself from short-circuiting. We've been married 6 years, I said. He nodded slowly. Not sympathy. Something adjacent to it. The look of a man standing at the edge of someone else's implosion and trying not to worsen the debris pattern. Mr. Mercer, he said, your wife is not who you think she is. People say that sort of line in thrillers, and somehow it always sounds stupid, until a federal agent says it to you on a Wednesday over bad coffee while your noodles go cold in a paper bag beside your knee. I looked at him and said, then I think you'd better start talking. He started with a photograph, not a file, not an official document, just a printed surveillance image on plain paper, folded once and reopened too many times. He slid it across the table. It was Camille. My Camille. Same dark hair, same posture, same ruthless elegance I'd spent years admiring from the safe side of marriage. She was standing in a parking garage handing a manila envelope to a man I had never seen before. The timestamp in the corner read, 17 months ago, Friday, 8:42 p.m. 17 months ago, on a Friday, I had been at home repainting the breakfast nook because Camille had texted from a conference dinner in San Diego that she'd be back late Sunday. She had not been in San Diego. Who is he? I asked. Adrian Cross, Agent Vale said. On paper, a consultant. In practice, he coordinates shell entities and layered transfer chains for a laundering network that's been moving fraudulent capital through regional firms for roughly 4 years. I sat back. And my wife's firm. He held my gaze. We believe Mercer Hale has processed approximately $53 million in fraudulent transfers over the last 22 months. He said $53 million the same way weather forecasters say partly cloudy. I picked up my coffee, put it back down, picked it up again, needed somewhere for my hands to go. My wife, I said slowly, is laundering money. We believe she is knowingly facilitating it. I looked out the window. A cyclist nearly got clipped by a delivery van. 2 women in long coats walked past laughing at something on a phone. Seattle kept being Seattle, damp, indifferent, self-contained. Then I turned back. Why are you telling me this? He didn't answer immediately. I leaned forward. You do not blow 21 months of undercover work because a man walks into the lobby with Korean food. So either I just ruined your week in a historically specific way, or you needed me for something. Relief. Real relief. Brief, but there. We hit a wall, he said. Then he talked for nearly 40 minutes. Here is the version without the whiteboard and the 3 colors of marker it really deserved. Adrian Cross was careful. Every transfer routed through Mercer Hale looked clean if you only examined the surface. Investor activity, syndicated capital, standard layering, legitimate-looking approvals, beautiful paperwork. The FBI had the patterns, they had shell structures, they had timing irregularities. What they did not have was the internal authorization trail proving that someone inside Mercer Hale had approved the transfers knowingly. They believed that someone was Camille. But nothing in the chain touched her directly. Every critical authorization funneled through the credentials of Mercer Hale's chief financial officer, a man named Alan Bryce. Alan Bryce had died 3 months earlier from what the report called sudden cardiac failure. Convenient, I said. Very, Agent Vale said. The way he said it told me what he believed and what he could not yet prove. With Bryce dead, he said, the clean trail ends at his desk. We have shadows. We need fingerprints. And that has to do with me how. He reached back into the portfolio and pulled out a document, a wire transfer record. I looked down at it, read it once, read it again. Then I stopped understanding the room for a second. This is my account. Yes. The amount, $385,000. Transferred 14 months ago from my personal savings into a holding company with a name bland enough to be invisible. I looked up slowly. I didn't do this. We know. Do you? That came out flatter than I intended. Or maybe exactly as flat as I intended. Hard to say. Because from where I was sitting, it looked very much like my wife had buried a contingency in our marriage in case anyone ever needed a husband to fall under the bus first. Someone created exposure around you, he said carefully. A fallback, a redirect. I laughed again. Same terrible laugh, hollow and wrong. My wife built herself an escape hatch, I said, and put my name on the handle. He did not disagree. What do you need? Access. Of course. There was a server room on the 17th floor of Mercer Hale, an internal terminal isolated from the network, air-gapped. The real authorization records, the ones never pushed to the external system and never attached to Bryce, were likely stored there on a local drive. No warrant, because if they moved officially, the drive would disappear before the paperwork finished printing. So they needed someone who could walk in unnoticed, someone who belonged, or someone adjacent enough to belonging to pass, which apparently was me. You need me, I said, to break into my wife's office and steal evidence against her for the FBI? In essence. That made me smile despite myself. There is a point in every disaster where the absurdity becomes too complete not to admire on some technical level. If she finds out? He gave me the kind of non-answer men in difficult professions use when honesty would sound too much like warning. I am asking you to help us prevent a larger disappearance of evidence. That is a polished way of saying this could go very badly. Yes. I looked at the takeout bag, opened it, shoved the dumplings toward him. I'm not hungry anymore, I said. Tell me exactly what to do. He gave me 24 hours. Not because that was ideal, because Camille had a board dinner that night, followed by an overnight stay at the Fairmont with 2 senior partners before a Thursday investor breakfast. His inside source in her office had confirmed the schedule. 1 night, 1 window. He handed me a white access card and a USB drive that looked offensively ordinary for something carrying the weight of $53 million and the end of my marriage. You'll wear a comms piece in your left ear, he said. I'll be with a team 2 blocks away. You get in, go to 17, plug the drive into the terminal, let the extraction run, then walk out. Like ordering coffee. If coffee involved federal indictment potential. I went home, sat in the kitchen, and stared at the wall I had repainted 18 months earlier while my wife was supposedly at a conference in Boston. Not San Diego this time. Boston. There had been more than one fake trip, apparently. That is the trouble with lies once they begin to line up. They stop arriving as incidents and become architecture. At 5:40, I changed jackets. Better one. Less mustard risk. If I was going to commit white-collar espionage in my wife's building, I intended to look like a man with access to expensive carpet. I put in the earpiece. Mercer, Agent Vale said in my ear. Yeah. You okay? No, I said. But let's keep that from becoming an operational issue. The Mercer Hale lobby at 7:34 p.m. was a different animal from the daytime version. Darker, quieter, less performance. One evening guard at the desk, not Marcus. A man named Leon who, according to Vale, had been briefed just enough to help without knowing enough to ruin his life later. Leon buzzed me through without a word. I respected that profoundly. The elevator bank for executive access required a card. Mine turned the light green. The doors opened. Smooth so far, Vale said in my ear. Do not say things like that, I told him. Pause. You think I'm jinxing it? Yes, that is exactly what I think. Just get to 17. The 17th floor was almost dark, a wash of low security lighting, blue exit signs, glass-walled offices reflecting me back at myself from every angle like the building was trying to show me all the ways I did not belong there. The server room sat at the end of the hall behind a coded door. Vale read me 6 digits. I entered them. The lock clicked. Cold hit me immediately. Machine cold. The temperature maintained for equipment that mattered more than comfort. Rows of servers blinked patiently in the dark. And there at the far end sat the standalone terminal. I crossed the room and sat. Left port, Vale said. I plugged in the drive. The screen blinked. Then a progress bar appeared. It began moving at the exact speed all progress bars move when your future is attached to them, slow enough to feel vindictive. 12%, 21%. I stared at it. Vale. Yeah. If this works, I said quietly, what happens to her? Silence. Then, that depends what's on the drive. Meaning her attorneys will try to argue coercion, pressure, limited knowledge, scapegoating via the dead CFO. If the drive shows full awareness and active direction, that becomes difficult. I stared at the bar. 46%. I thought about Camille at 32, standing in our kitchen with a legal pad and a pitch deck and eyes lit with the kind of belief that makes bystanders volunteer their whole lives without checking the terms. That was the night I had fallen in love with her fully. Not at dinner. Not on our 3rd date. Not over wine. At the kitchen island with financial projections and impossible confidence and the smell of marker ink in the air. I wondered when that woman had become this one. Then I wondered whether I had ever actually known the difference. 63%. Mercer, Vale said, voice changing. Hold. Every light on the floor came on at once. Bright, sudden, total, my whole body locked. Vale. I see it. Someone's here. Yes. Camille? The pause that followed stretched tight. No. Camille's tracker still shows the hotel. Then who? Another voice in the background on his end, urgent, overlapping. Then Vale came back. Cross's vehicle just got picked up 2 blocks south. He was not supposed to have building access. Of course he had building access. Why wouldn't he? This whole week had been built on my underestimating other people's keys. How long? 40 seconds. The footsteps in the hall were not subtle. That is important. If you have spent your whole life on good dramatic fiction, you think danger announces itself with stealth, quiet, careful, a creak, a breath. Actual danger, the kind carried by a man who already knows where you are and what he intends, often walks at an ordinary pace. No rush, no panic. That is what makes it horrifying. 78%, 88%. The handle moved. Vale, stay on the drive. The door opened. Adrian Cross was not what I had imagined. He looked like someone's distinguished uncle. Silver hair, expensive overcoat, medium height, hands clean and elegant, the kind of man who might chair a museum fundraiser or own a house where nobody is allowed to put coasters down too hard. Only the eyes ruined it. His eyes were administrative, cold, without effort. The eyes of a man who had long ago converted guilt into process. He looked at me, at the terminal, at the drive. Mr. Mercer, he said pleasantly, I've been meaning to meet you. The progress bar hit 93%. That makes one of us, I said. He smiled. It did not reach anywhere human. You should remove the drive and hand it to me, he said. And then we can discuss how unnecessarily complicated this has all become. 97%. Here is the thing. I am not an action hero. I am a man who still forgets one of his streaming passwords every single month and has to reset it using security questions about a dog that died in 2014. But there was something about hearing this very polished criminal tell me to hand over the one piece of truth left in my marriage that clarified me instantly. I stood up slowly. No, I said. The bar hit 100%. The drive ejected with a soft little click so underwhelming it almost insulted the moment. I pulled it free. Cross took one step closer, and then the stairwell door at the end of the hall exploded open. FBI! Hands where I can see them! It happened fast after that. Vale first through the door, 2 agents behind him, flashlights, commands, movement, the whole ugly choreography of reality catching up. Cross looked at me one last time, and for the first time since he entered the room, the pleasantness was gone. What was underneath it was not dramatic, just pure contempt that the ordinary husband had turned out to be a variable no one had budgeted for. They took him in the hallway, efficiently, without theater. Movies have lied to all of us. Arrests are less satisfying than paperwork and more abrupt than rage. Vale came back into the server room breathing harder than a federal man probably likes to admit to. He looked at my hand. Tell me. I opened it. The drive sat in my palm. Small. White. Ridiculous. The single most destructive little object I had ever touched. He exhaled once. You did good, Mercer. I want the transfer off my name, I said immediately. All of it. I want that record corrected, contained, buried, burned, whatever your process is, and I want to know what's on this drive before she does. He looked at me for a long moment. You sure? No, I said. But tell me anyway. They told me 3 days later in a federal conference room with terrible coffee and lighting so bad everyone looked mildly criminal. The drive contained everything. 4 years of authorization records, cross-reference approvals, encrypted internal communications, fallback routing, contingency plans. And Camille had not been pressured. She had not been dragged into it halfway through. She had not been protecting her company from collapse or patching over some early bad judgment. She had been there from the beginning, from the first arranged capital infusion when Mercer Hale was still barely solvent. She needed money she could not source cleanly. Cross had it. And once she made the first deal, the rest became easier. $53 million worth of easier. And 14 months before I walked into that coffee shop, she had set up the transfer from my account. Biometric authorization, personal device, deliberate, not collateral by accident. Collateral by design. That part hurt more than the laundering. Not because the crime was smaller, because the intention was more intimate. You can build a financial crime with strangers. You have to know a person to prepare him as an exit plan. She was arrested Thursday morning. I was not there. Vale offered to notify me when it happened. I told him not to. Some images do not make a wound cleaner just because they are accurate. I drove instead. No destination. Just Seattle and rain and traffic and one long loop through a city that had, quite reasonably, no interest in centering my tragedy. At a stoplight near Fremont, I looked at the passenger seat where the takeout bag had sat 2 days before. The grease stain from the dumplings had sunk through the paper into the upholstery slightly. I stared at it long enough for the horn behind me to remind me the light had changed. I kept driving. And somewhere in all of that gray movement, with the wipers dragging rain across the windshield and my marriage lying in pieces behind me and the city refusing to pause for any of it, I understood something I wish I had understood years earlier. The worst part about loving a liar is not the lie. It is finding out how much of your sincerity got repurposed into scenery. The dinners, the repainted walls, the coffee orders, the routines, the life. All of it real to one person, useful to the other. That is the insult that lasts. By the time the paperwork settled and the transfer was formally corrected and my name was pulled clear of the laundering structure, I found I did not hate her. Hate would have implied too much intimacy remained. What I felt instead was colder, more exact. She had built her life on secrets, and somewhere in the middle of all that careful architecture, she had accidentally allowed one real thing into it. Me. Then she cut a trapdoor beneath it. That was her mistake. Because when the floor opened, I was still standing, and she was the one who fell through.